Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging deep into the philosophical blueprint that dictates, really, how the U.S. Army maintains its fighting edge. We're talking about Field Manual 7.0, simply titled Training.
Right. And this isn't just about, scheduling some time on the range.
Not at all.
This document defines how leaders, from the smallest team all the way up to the largest formation, prioritize every single minute of their professional lives to ensure readiness.
Yeah.
It's the why behind the what.
That's a great way to put it. So our mission today isn't just a clinical summary, right? We're not going chapter by chapter.
Absolutely not. We want to explore the underlying philosophy, the why behind how Army leaders are supposed to think about readiness. How does this doctrine compel a commander to act?
And how does it shape everything a unit does, whether they're sitting in garrison or, getting that call to deploy?
Exactly, because when we talk about doctrine, especially something as foundational as FM7 ever, we're dealing with something authoritative.
As it's defined in Army doctrine itself, it serves as, what is it, fundamental principles and supporting procedures. It's the approved body of knowledge.
Precisely. It is the baseline assumption for how the Army will operate.
Yeah.
Now, doctrine always requires judgment in its application. It's not a script.
It's a guide, not a checklist.
It's a guide that minimizes confusion when speed and precision are absolutely critical.
Yeah.
If you want to understand how the Army generates combat power, you really have to start here.
So if this is the blueprint for success, what is the ultimate, the non-negotiable mission statement that's driving this entire document?
The goal is explicitly rooted in a moral obligation.
A moral one. That's a strong word.
It is. First, the doctrine aims to build a total Army. And that means the active regular Army, the Army National Guard, and the Army Reserve.
All components working together.
Right. A force that is unequaled in skill, adaptability, and power. That's the strategic output. But the moral imperative, the real why, it's that we must never send soldiers into harm's way unless they are fully trained, properly equipped, and properly led.
And FM 7.0 is the mechanism for honoring that commitment.
It is. It's how we keep that promise.
That sets a very, very high bar. And given the immense spectrum of missions the Army takes on, everything from disaster relief to security cooperation, what is the single overarching priority that guides all this training effort?
That's clearly defined in the Army's foundational doctrine. Readiness for large-scale ground combat is the Army's first priority.
The big one.
The big one. While we must be ready to operate across the entire spectrum, stability operations, humanitarian aid, cyber defense, the ability to prevail in high-intensity, large-scale combat is paramount.
It has to be.
This demands immediate readiness to answer the nation's call, anywhere, anytime, and often with little or no notice. The fundamental role of the American soldier, it remains the same as it was over 244 years ago.
And what's that?
To win decisive conflicts.
So FM 7.0 is the doctrine of how you get ready to win a high-stakes war while ensuring maximum safety for the force you send to fight it. That's a powerful context to start with.
It's everything.
All right, so let's dig into that core philosophy. Why is training seen as the single most important activity the Army does to prepare for operations? It consumes so much time, money, resources. What are we trying to build?
We are trying to build credibility and capacity. And those are really two sides of the same coin. The Army must generate forces that are capable of prompt and sustained land combat.
To defeat enemy ground forces.
Right. That capacity to prevail in ground combat is the decisive factor in breaking an enemy's will and their ability to continue fighting. So training is the continuous leader-centric process that achieves that operational output.
And the doctrine doesn't just treat training as some kind of internal preparation, does it? It's explicitly linked to national strategy, specifically deterrence.
Absolutely. Training is an active component of what's called integrated deterrence. A credible Army force, one that is visibly prepared to succeed in large-scale combat, significantly reduces the risk of miscalculation by potential adversaries.
It's a message.
It's a powerful message. When we conduct joint and multinational training, we enhance interoperability with our key partners, which further strengthens deterrence by showing a unified, capable front. Maintaining that high level of readiness sends a message to the world. We are ready, and we are capable.
Okay, let's get into the 6 principles of training. You could call them the DNA of FM 7.0. The first one, train as you fight, is maybe the most recited phrase in the entire military lexicon. But what does it truly mandate? What's the non-negotiable requirement for a commander here?
The mandate is realism, and it goes so far beyond just the physical environment.
So not just training in the desert if you're going to the desert.
That's the start. but it's not the end. Realism requires replicating the complex, uncertain, and lethal operational environments the unit will actually face. It's not just about using live ammunition. It's about exposing units to stress, to complexity, and forcing decision-making under high friction. The doctrine is crystal clear on this. Leaders must ensure units cope with those complex, stressful, lethal situations they're likely to encounter in combat.
I want to challenge that a little bit, though. I mean, we have limited land, we have limited training resources, and we have safety protocols that have to be followed. Can we ever truly replicate the lethality and the existential stress of actual combat?
That's the critical tension, isn't it? It's inherent in the doctrine, and it brings us back to those philosophical principles. Yes. War is inherently dynamic and uncertain. The doctrine acknowledges this by breaking down uncertainty into two components.
Which are?
First is chance. Those unexpected events, things that are just beyond our control. The second is friction.
Fighting friction.
Yes, friction is all the obstacles that make even simple tasks incredibly difficult. Bad weather, fusing intelligence, equipment failure, a key leader getting taken out.
All the things that go wrong.
All the things that inevitably go wrong. Training must prepare leaders and soldiers to function effectively in environments that are defined by these uncertainties. If a unit only trains on the perfect plan in a totally sterile environment, they will inevitably fail when they encounter real-world chance and friction.
You have to train them to be agile, to fight the enemy and not the plan.
Exactly. You have to force those decentralized decisions under stress.
That sets a perfect transition to the second principle. Training is commander-driven. This isn't just a suggestion. It really defines command responsibility. What are the practical daily implications of a commander driving training?
It means the commander is personally engaged and present. It's that simple and that profound. Their actions communicate that training is the paramount priority.
So if a commander is always in a meeting or delegating oversight of a key training event?
They're sending a signal. They're signaling to the entire formation that training is, in fact, secondary to whatever else is going on.
So beyond just being present, what does the doctrine specifically demand of that commander?
They must set the expectations. They have to clearly communicate the desired end state, and critically, they must effectively resource the training. But maybe the most difficult part in a high-demand environment is the mandate to protect their subordinates' valuable training time.
That protection piece seems huge.
It is. That protection is what creates organizational stability and predictability. It's the commander saying, no, this administrative distraction is secondary to our approved training plan. That takes discipline.
Let's talk about standards. The third principle is train to standard. In a world where time is always limited, why can't we just aim for, proficient or good enough?
Because good enough isn't a doctrinal measurement, and it's a dangerous mindset. The standard is the documented objective measurement of tactical competence that is required to win.
It's not subjective.
It cannot be subjective.
Yeah.
A standard is defined by clearly observable and measurable activities. If a unit operates below that defined standard, the likelihood of mission failure increases exponentially when you're faced with a thinking, capable adversary. We simply can't afford to guess at competence.
And doctrinally, who is responsible for ensuring that training execution holds to that standard on the ground?
That falls squarely on the senior NCOs. The latest doctrine explicitly emphasizes their role in this. They ensure training is conducted to standard, not time.
Can you expand on that? To standard, not time.
It means if a task requires 6 repetitions to achieve mastery, the NCO ensures 6 repetitions are executed, even if it runs past the scheduled end time. They are the quality control mechanism on the ground. They are the ones who ensure the mastery and the competence that are absolutely necessary for collective success.
This friction point of time versus standard, it brings us right to the fourth principle. Training is protected. You mentioned this, but it feels like this principle was written specifically to address the realities of garrison life.
It's a direct acknowledgement of organizational friction. The doctrine says that training, once it's approved in the long-range plan, must be shielded from unforeseen and non-essential demands, or what the doctrine often calls unprogrammed distractors.
But how does a leader enforce this? I mean, if a higher headquarters calls with an urgent administrative demand or a mandatory last-minute briefing, how does a junior leader justify telling them no based on doctrine?
Well, this is where the commander-driven principle nests perfectly with the protected principle. It is the senior commander's responsibility to set the organizational culture where that approved training plan holds weight equal to an operational order.
So it has to come from the top.
It has to. Protecting the training plan isn't just about resource allocation, it's about generating predictability. If junior leaders know their time is stable, they can actually plan, prepare, and execute rigorous training without that constant fear of interruption. That's how you foster the positive, focused culture FM70 requires.
That is a massive cultural shift for some organizations.
It absolutely is, and it requires discipline from the top all the way down. Finally, we have the sustainment aspects. Train to sustain and train to maintain. These manage the reality that skill atrophy is inevitable.
Can you explain that concept of task atrophy?
Sure, unit proficiencies, they naturally degrade. It's due to personnel turnover, gaps in training frequency, fielding new equipment, or sometimes just resource cuts. The doctrine recognizes this constant fluctuation. So the goal of sustainment is efficiency. It's about working to sustain proficiencies within what's called a band of excellence.
Band of excellence? That sounds a little technical, but it's really just an organizational efficiency concept, isn't it?
It's the key to resource management.
Yeah.
It defines this narrow range where proficiency is maintained. And it is significantly more efficient in terms of time, personnel, and money to keep the unit's proficiency within that narrow band of excellence than it is to let skills degrade significantly and then require a massive time-intensive effort to rebuild them from scratch.
It avoids that cycle of training, forgetting, and then having to retrain everything.
Which wastes enormous resources. This is the constant economical path to consistent combat readiness.
All right, let's move on now to the leaders themselves. If commanders are the primary trainers, how does this responsibility actually manifest in daily operations? And how do the distinctive roles of the officer and NCO Corps interface within this whole training enterprise?
The roles are entirely nested, and the doctrine requires a very clear division of labor. The officer corps, led by the commander, sets the strategic and operational vision. They set the priorities and the overall battle focus for the unit.
And the 2024 doctrine, it specifies a very clear metric for evaluation that reinforces this, right?
It does. It says commanders train the next echelon down and are doctrinally responsible for evaluating 2 echelons down.
So why that 2-echelon evaluation? Why not just evaluate the echelon you directly train?
It's about ensuring institutional visibility and enforcing standards at the crucial point of execution. Think of a division commander.
Okay.
They train their brigades, that's the next echelon down, but they evaluate company-level proficiency. That's 2 echelons down.
I see.
This ensures that senior leadership maintains contact with the functional level where collective mission tasks are actually executed, the company, the battery, or the troop level. It prevents senior commanders from relying solely on reports from their immediate subordinates. It ensures accountability for the execution of standards right at the tactical edge.
So if the commander sets the target and then enforces the standard 2 levels down, who is handling the grinding day-to-day work of instruction and mastery?
That is the NCO Corps. Unequivocally, they are the engine of day-to-day training. They ensure subordinate leaders are prepared, they adhere to standards, they enforce repetition until mastery is achieved.
And they use those systematic training models, like the 8-step training model.
That's right. They use those models to build soldier competence. The NCOs ensure that individual tasks are not just performed, but truly mastered. This provides that absolutely essential solid foundation for any collective training proficiency. The fidelity of the NCO Corps determines the fidelity of the combat unit, period.
Let's talk about a concept that's critical to modern operations: mission command. This doctrine emphasizes decentralized execution. So how does the philosophy of mission command specifically apply to a training environment, especially since it asks leaders to, loosen the reins a bit?
Mission command is fundamentally about empowering subordinate decision-making, appropriate to their level and the situation. In training, this means the commander sets the intent, the vision for the end state, but does not micromanage the how.
So mission orders emphasize the results, not the methods.
Exactly. The what and the why, not the how. That minimization of centralized control is the only way to generate agile, adaptive forces that can function in that chaos we talked about earlier.
But this sounds inherently risky. I mean, if you delegate a multi-million-dollar maneuver to a junior officer, how does the doctrine build the mutual trust required to make that system work?
Trust is the cultural prerequisite. It's non-negotiable. Successful mission command demands that leaders create a culture of mutual trust. If subordinates deeply understand the commander's intent, they are far more likely to exercise what's called disciplined initiative when unexpected events occur.
Disciplined initiative.
Right. And crucially, the expectation is that subordinates report what they intend to do, not ask for permission, and then they execute unless specifically denied. That reporting mechanism maintains accountability while still enabling speed and initiative.
Can you give us an example of how this plays out under historical stress, where trusting subordinates was absolutely necessary for success?
Absolutely. You could look at the historical precedent of the Ruhr encirclement in 1945. American commanders, facing a fluid, high-tempo operational environment, used mission orders techniques. They'd give only one or two immediate objectives and a distant objective, but without prescribing the route or the exact method.
So they gave them the what and why, but not the how.
Exactly. And when communications broke down, as they inevitably do in large-scale combat, the subordinate commanders, because they understood the overall intent, they took aggressive, disciplined initiative. They maneuvered and linked up, fulfilling the objective as they understood it. Their ability to operate autonomously, relying on that shared understanding. That's the ultimate goal of mission command training. You train to give the subordinate freedom of action within defined boundaries.
That really highlights the tension, though. The commander remains legally and ethically accountable for everything, yet they have to delegate decision-making for their subordinates to develop. How does the commander, as the primary trainer, balance that accountability with the need to allow mistakes in a training environment?
That is the ultimate leadership challenge defined in the doctrine. While the commander is always accountable, the successful leader realizes that subordinates will make errors.
They have to.
They have to, and they must be allowed to happen, within safe limits, of course, to gain the necessary experience. Delegating tasks is a deliberate strategy for leader development. It allows the commander to assess their subordinates' true capabilities under stress. The commander's job is to create a learning environment where leaders can recover quickly from adversity, synthesize the lessons learned, and move forward rather than being paralyzed by the fear of failure.
Let's pivot back to resources for a minute. Since time, money, and land are always finite, how does FM70 provide the discipline to ensure units train on tasks that genuinely contribute to readiness and avoid that trap of just training on comfortable or irrelevant tasks?
This is where battle focus is non-negotiable. Battle focus is the mechanism that imposes discipline on the unit training plan. It answers that fundamental question. What do we train when we cannot possibly train everything?
And the practical tool for applying that focus is the METL, right? The Mission Essential Task List.
Correct. The METL is a tailored group of mission essential tasks, or METs, selected by the commander. The commander conducts a rigorous mission analysis, taking into account the guidance from the next higher commander and the unit's designed role, to select the METs that define the unit's current battle focus.
And this prevents that mission creep in the training schedule.
Precisely. It ensures that the unit's efforts are concentrated on the tasks most critical to mission success.
What about units in the institutional domain or the generating force? They might not have a specified operational mission right away. How do they develop a METL?
The doctrine accounts for this. If a unit lacks an assigned operational mission from higher headquarters, they train the METs derived from the headquarters, Department of the Army Standard Mission Essential Task List. This is the doctrinal fallback. It ensures there's a continuous foundational readiness across the force, even in the absence of a specific deployment order.
Now, connecting that brigade METL all the way down to the individual soldier task, that's the concept of nesting. Why is discipline nesting so vital for unit cohesion and operational success?
Nesting ensures unity of effort. It's the logical process of linking the strategic goals of the highest echelon all the way down to the lowest execution level. Without nesting, you have units operating in isolation. They might achieve internal proficiency, but they're not supporting the collective mission.
Can you walk us through a specific nesting chain? Make it concrete for us.
Sure. Let's take a combined arms brigade preparing for large-scale combat operations, or LSCO. The division commander's mission essential task might be conduct sustained maneuver to defeat enemy forces.
Okay, very high level.
Very high level. The brigade commander then translates this into their MET. Conduct combined arms breach of an enemy defensive position.
Getting more specific.
Right. Then the battalion commander translates that into a collective task. Execute suppression of enemy air defenses and clear a breach lane. And then the platoon leader defines the battle tasks, the collective task that platoons train to support that higher MET. A platoon battle task might be conduct deliberate obstacle reduction under direct fire.
And then finally, that trickles all the way down to the individual soldier.
To the individual soldier tasks, like identify and prime a breaching charge. The entire training apparatus, from the ammunition request to the after-action review, is now focused on ensuring every single soldier is prepared to support that collective breach.
That illustration makes the discipline really clear. So what are the operational consequences, the real-world risks, if a unit fails to maintain this disciplined battle focus and, for example, trains on irrelevant tasks just because they're easy or familiar?
The consequences are severe and they're multifaceted. Operationally, unfocused training means vital, perishable skills atrophy. That forces the unit to spend excessive time and resources later on just to regain that proficiency.
You fall out of that band of
You
excellence.
fall right out of it. And more fundamentally, if training isn't properly nested, the unit might achieve high proficiency at the individual or small unit level. Maybe every squad is perfect at PT, but they will fail to achieve the required collective proficiency needed for the assigned operational mission. The perfect parts won't fit together to make a functional war machine. In a decisive moment, the failure will be collective.
All right, let's shift to the how, the actual mechanics of training management. The Army Operations Process Plan, prepare, execute, assess, is the backbone of virtually every doctrinal activity. How does it structure training management?
The operations process, from ADP 5.0, provides the systematic structure. It ensures rigor and repetition. It moves the unit away from ad hoc, unscheduled events toward a predictable, planned progression.
So let's start with plan within the training context. What does that look like?
The plan phase is where the commander visualizes the solution, articulates their training guidance, and defines the desired end state, always linking it back to that NTL. This involves creating the long-range unit training plan, or UTP, which should look months or even years ahead.
And this is where they map out that crawl, walk, run sequence.
Exactly. This is where the commander develops courses of action and identifies those progressive training events that will build complexity over time. And subordinate commanders engage in collaborative planning, making sure their UTPs support the higher unit's mission.
And once that plan is set, we move to prepare. This must be a logistical nightmare, making sure all the resources are ready to go.
Preparation is indeed focused on that mid-range horizon detailed resource coordination, ensuring ranges are booked, logistics are synchronized. But the philosophical core of prepare is ensuring the unit is ready to train.
Ready to train.
Right. This involves crucial measures like rehearsals, pre-combat checks, PCCs, and pre-combat inspections, or PCIs. If a unit arrives at a training site lacking essential equipment, proper training will not occur. And that valuable, protected training time is just wasted. Preparation is the phase where you mitigate training friction before it happens.
Execute seems pretty straightforward, but what does the doctrine demand of leaders during this phase?
Execution is the implementation of the UTP, and it's focused on achieving the training objectives to standard. The doctrinal demand on leaders is engagement. Leaders must be physically present, fully engaged, providing guidance and assessing the training in real time. And crucially, units conduct retraining as required until the task standards are met.
They don't just check the box and leave at 5 o'clock.
No, they remain until proficiency is achieved.
And assess completes the loop. We're going to discuss assessment tools later, but why is it so essential for the assessment phase to be continuous?
Because it feeds directly back into the next iteration of the plan phase. Continuous assessment determines progress toward objectives and overall unit proficiency in real time. If you only assess the very end of the event, the unit has lost valuable time to correct deficiencies immediately.
Let's elaborate on that crawl, walk, run progression. Why is that specific sequencing so vital for developing competence?
It's the fundamental logic of building muscle memory and team competence from the ground up. Crawl focuses entirely on mastering individual soldier skills. Individual proficiency is the foundation. If soldiers can't master their individual tasks, any collective task will fail.
Makes sense.
Walk builds on that, focusing on team and small unit tasks. And then finally, the run stage is where units train collectively under increasingly realistic conditions, integrating complex systems to achieve full task proficiencies as effective and efficient teams. It's a predictable and reliable path to competence. It prevents units from rushing into collective exercises before they've mastered the basics.
But the modern environment presents huge constraints. We've got budget cuts, limited land, safety concerns. How does the doctrine allow commanders to achieve realism and repetition efficiently when they can't train everything live?
The doctrine recognizes that conducting all training in a strictly live environment is neither practical nor possible. The solution lies in the integrated training environment, or ITE, which mandates the skilled blending of live, virtual, and constructive environments, LVC.
Okay, can you define those three and explain how their integration helps achieve realism?
Sure. Live training is the traditional field environment personnel and vehicles operating in the physical world. Virtual training uses simulators, or trainers, like flight simulators or virtual gunnery trainers. These are excellent for repetition without excessive resource cost or risk. And constructive training is simulated training involving units and systems, often modeling large-scale combat power application, where commanders maneuver virtual forces against virtual enemies.
So if I'm a battalion commander, how do I blend LVC to achieve a complex MBT?
It's a great question. You might use constructive simulations to rehearse your command post procedures and logistics flow over a multi-day operation. Then, you use virtual simulators for your tank crews to perfect gunnery synchronization. And finally, you use live field training exercises for the dismounted infantry platoons to conduct the close fight.
So you're layering them.
You're layering them.
Um,
By blending them, you achieve realism, you provide the necessary high-fidelity repetition for mastery, and you maintain resource efficiency by avoiding the continuous high cost of fuel and ammunition that purely live events would require.
We've established the continuous nature of assessment. But how do commanders move past just subjective feelings to objectively measure that proficiency and readiness? How do they quantify whether the unit is truly prepared to execute its METL?
The assessment has to be structured. It's a two-step process. First, you objectively evaluate performance during the training. And second, you assess the results of those evaluations. This structure requires the commander to rely on clearly defined indicators.
And this brings us back to MOPs and MOEs. We often mix these terms up. How do they functionally differ within the assessment framework?
A measure of performance, or MOP, is an indicator used to measure a friendly action that's tied to task accomplishment. MOPs answer the question, are we doing things right?
So, did the platoon achieve the required rate of march?
Exactly. Did the soldier properly prime the charge? MOPs confirm adherence to the standard. A measure of effectiveness, or MOE, conversely, judges progress toward an objective or a desired outcome. MOEs look beyond mere task completion to judge the action achieved the desired effect.
So, MOPs track activity efficiency, and MOEs track mission impact.
That's a perfect way to put it. And once those MOPs and MOEs are gathered, the commander makes a holistic assessment of tasks, weapons, and overall unit proficiency. They consider multiple sources, formal evaluations, after-action reviews, their own personal observations to determine that final training readiness rating, D, P, P, and so on. This process removes subjectivity and results in an objective, auditable assessment of the unit's combat readiness.
Let's revisit that band of excellence we discussed earlier, but connect it now to the assessment cycle. Why is this concept more than just a nice-to-have goal? Why is it explicitly doctrinal for efficiency?
It's purely about organizational economics. The band of excellence defines the range in which leaders actively work to sustain unit proficiencies. It prevents that massive waste of time and resources associated with the cyclical atrophy and rebuild model.
Just more efficient.
It is far more efficient. If you allow skills to fall outside that band, the time and effort required to bring them back up to standard, due to the need for lengthy retraining, more resources, maybe even professional military education, is exponentially higher than the effort required for constant sustainment within the band. It is the economical, responsible, and continuous path to readiness.
Now, for what might be the most important learning tool in the entire doctrine, the after-action review, or AAR, what separates a true doctrinally compliant AAR from a simple critique or a lecture delivered by the senior leader?
The difference lies in ownership and participation. A true AAR is defined as a professional discussion that absolutely requires the active participation of those being trained. It is fundamentally not a critique or a simple debrief delivered by the leadership after the fact.
So what's the goal of that active participation then?
It's designed to enable the unit or the soldiers to discover for themselves what happened, what went right, what went wrong, and critically, why, and then to develop their own plan for improving performance. This candid self-discovery process promotes ownership. It provides insights into strengths and weaknesses from all perspectives, focusing directly on the commander's original guidance, the training objectives, and the standard. It cultivates a culture of candor and learning, not of blame.
But that requires immense cultural maturity, doesn't it? The ability to admit mistakes publicly and focus on collective improvement rather than self-preservation. How does the doctrine ensure AARs aren't just an exercise in checking a box?
For the AAR to be effective, its findings, the discovered strengths to sustain and the deficiencies to improve, must be routed immediately back into the planning cycle.
It has to close the loop.
It has to close the loop and be subsequently trained. An effective AAR demonstrates a continuous readiness cycle. It ensures that the next iteration of the unit training plan directly addresses the deficiencies identified in the previous execution. That guarantees continuous improvement, not just compliance.
Okay, so FM 70 is the doctrine of readiness. But modern conflicts span this vast spectrum, from high-tech, large-scale combined arms combat to low-intensity, long-term stability operations among civilian populations. How does this universal training doctrine prepare forces for such a broad range of modern conflict?
The training doctrine prepares Army forces to conduct what's called unified land operations, which explicitly integrates offense, defense, and stability operations simultaneously. While readiness for large-scale combat operations (LSKO) provides the necessary foundation of lethality and maneuver skills, the training must integrate all the necessary roles for decisive action.
When we talk about LSCO and multi-domain operations, or MDO, what are some of the specific non-traditional threats that training has to address in the modern context?
Well, beyond the traditional close combat fight, which requires focused training on combined arms maneuver and survivability training, must prepare forces for environments where our technological advantages are contested.
Right.
Adversaries continuously develop means to contest the space and cyber domains. Therefore, training has to prepare Army forces to continue operations effectively, even when space capabilities are degraded.
Meaning no GPS, limited communication.
Unreliable intelligence.
Yeah.
Exactly. Furthermore, protection planning is critical, considering both kinetic threats and localized irregular warfare threats, ranging from level I, that's terrorists or criminals, to level 2, which are small-scale irregular warfare forces capable of coordinated attacks, ambushes, or IED attacks.
That's a significant shift in mindset. How does a single training event prepare a leader to shift from commanding a decisive combined arms maneuver to dealing with a level I threat?
It requires training the ability to switch mindsets. The planning has to incorporate scenarios that require transitioning seamlessly from force-on-force engagement to force protection and localized stability. You have to train leaders to recognize when they have concluded offensive action and must immediately focus on consolidating gains.
Tell us about that concept, consolidating gains.
Consolidation of gains includes activities to make any temporary operational success enduring. It's about setting the conditions for a transition of control to legitimate civil authorities. While it happens throughout the fight, it becomes the primary focus after large-scale combat operations conclude.
So training must prepare leaders for those stability tasks.
Yes, essential stability tasks. Establishing civil security and control, restoring immediate services like food and shelter.
And this ties directly into the long-term success of the operation, establishing legitimacy.
Exactly. Training must instill in leaders the critical role of developing trust and legitimacy among the populace. Stability tasks like justice, governance, and humanitarian assistance are paramount. Failure to protect civilians or ensure the rule of law jeopardizes the legitimacy of the entire operation. That's why stability tasks have to be trained with the same rigor as offensive maneuver.
Finally, let's consider leader development through the lens of FM 70. How do these complex training events help leaders tackle broader conceptual challenges, like systems thinking and managing resources outside their immediate chain of command?
The complexity of the training scenario is the laboratory for development. By participating in complex LVC environments and multinational exercises, leaders learn to think in systems, how their actions impact logistics, adjacent units, and non-military actors. They learn to manage scarce resources and apply doctrinal principles across joint, interagency, and multinational contexts.
So it's about developing judgment.
It is. Allowing leaders to exercise disciplined initiative in these high-stress training environments develops their judgment and prepares them for greater strategic responsibility. It teaches them not just what to do, but how the organization functions within the larger governmental structure.
And since most modern operations are multinational, how must training specifically address that inevitable friction when dealing with partners and allies?
The doctrine anticipates that most operations will be multinational, and so training must directly simulate those challenges. Interoperability friction is common. It often stems from differences in doctrinal terminology, interpretation of orders, or cultural understanding.
Things get lost in translation.
Literally and figuratively. Training needs to address these head-on. Leaders must cultivate genuine cultural understanding. Dedicated liaison teams are vital for cultural bridging and mitigating those interoperability challenges, especially in highly synchronized areas like joint fires and information sharing. Training with multinational forces is often the precursor to successful mission execution. So to synthesize this entire deep dive, FM 70 successfully frames training not as a series of disconnected events or some kind of checklist. It's a continuous, disciplined cycle plan. Prepare, execute, assessed driven entirely by command leadership.
And the ultimate purpose.
The singular, ultimate purpose of every principle we've discussed is generating and sustaining combat power, the total means of destructive and disruptive force applied against an enemy, and doing so efficiently and ethically.
Here's where it gets really interesting for every leader listening. We've dissected the doctrine that demands the protection of training time to achieve sustained readiness within that band of excellence. But doctrine meets reality every single day. What does prioritizing training truly mean for your daily choices? And where does that line blur between a necessary mission demand and an organizational distraction? We want you to reflect deeply on these questions as you move forward with your mission, starting right now. First, how battle-focused is your unit's current training plan? Are you truly nesting individual and battle tasks to achieve the higher commander's end state? Or are you prioritizing legacy tasks that simply make the unit feel comfortable?
Second, are your after-action reviews truly driving change and continuous improvement, forcing unit ownership and candor, or are they reverting to simple critiques delivered by leadership that merely check a required box?
And finally, a question for every leader at any echelon. Where could you better protect training time for your subordinates to build that predictable, positive training culture that FM 70 requires for sustained readiness?
Thanks for diving deep with us into the philosophical blueprint for Army readiness.
We'll see you next time.